This is Mousetrap. It's considered to be the first 3D board game. It was originally published in 1963 by Ideal. Now today we're going to have a look at my Milton Bradley 1986 edition and compare it to my 2021 Hasbro edition and see what's changed and what stayed the same over the course of 35 years. Now to start, if we look at box art, we can see that this has the classic Milton Bradley white stripe that includes what age the game is appropriate for and how many players it's intended for. This was very common on Milton Bradley games in the 80s, so this will be a nostalgic sight for a lot of people watching. I love the robust and colorful art on the front. We've got the nice loud titling and red print Mousetrap. We're using the colors of the board art to really jump off the box, showing off the detail of the Rube Goldberg machine that makes up the Mousetrap. Very entertaining, and I get a kick out of this kid here. I think this kid is having the best time of any kid I've ever seen on the cover art of a board game, so good for him. This is very iconic to the point where I can almost hear the song from the commercial when I'm looking at this box. When we flip it over, it's a little bit more tame, very garden variety photos of some of the components of the game and some of the box art. Nothing really to write home about, but again, it's a classic board game box, and that includes the fact that it's a two-piece box with a lid and plenty of storage space here, which I like about this because there's a lot of small pieces to this game. It's nice to have a box designed for easy storage. So keep that in mind as we look at the 2021 edition, which again, bright, colorful art. I love that the mice on the front are nods to the color of the little play pieces here. I actually think that the art on here is reminiscent of a lot of modern day animation that you might see on Nickelodeon or the Cartoon Network. So I think that's great. I think this is really eye-catching. When we get on the back, the art's also equally eye-catching. There's lots of neat little shots of the mechanism here and some kids having a good time playing the game. But remember what I was talking about storage. When we look at the modern box, it's just a flip-top box. Well, it's significantly smaller than the 1986 edition, and the parts that comprise the 2021 edition are actually individually larger. So what that causes is a problem with packing this back up. When you put everything back in the box, even though the board folds into quarters, which is significantly smaller than the original board, this takes up a larger footprint on the table, but folds up to a smaller size, takes up less space in the box, but it doesn't yield enough space for the rest of these larger components. So it's like putting a puzzle together. It's very frustrating. And I'm kind of surprised because some of the retro games that I've seen Hasbro bring back, I'll use Forbidden Bridge as an example. The 2021 edition of Forbidden Bridge by Hasbro comes with a very impressive carton that's a flip-top box and allows for easy storage of the game by comparison to the 1992 original. So I was kind of surprised to see with one of their flagship games like Mousetrap, the box isn't designed with easy storage in mind. So I'm going to take a few points off for that. But I will say overall, I do think that the box art's very nice. I think it's pretty, it's really eye-catching, it's very robust. Both the 1986 and the 2021 edition have beautiful, bright colors on the game boards and on the boxes, but there is a noticeable difference where the modern version is almost like neon bright. Now, getting back to the 1986 edition, let's talk about the differences that you can see on the board. Many of the game spaces have text instructions for the gameplay or numbers. So how the rule set for the 1986 edition works is as players make their way around the periphery of the board and they land on these numbered spaces, they assemble the trap based on how many players of the game this number represents. So for instance, if there are only 2 players to the board and a player lands on this space signifying 2 players, then they will assemble a piece of the trap. If there are 2, 3, or 4 players, or let's say 2 to 3 players, and that corresponds to the amount of players when a player lands on that space, they assemble a piece of the trap. The idea is the game is paced based on how many players there are, so that the trap is fully assembled by the time players reach the end where this cheese wheel is. Now, the end of this game is referred to as the loop. It's the cheese wheel and 5 additional spaces, making 6 total spaces where players are stuck at the end of the game. So how this works is as players make their way around the board, they assemble the trap and collect pieces of cheese and steal pieces of cheese from each other. When they get to that last loop is when players start playing basically Russian roulette over who's on the cheese wheel and who sets off the trap. The last player alive without being trapped is the winner of the game. Now this is the part that makes me feel like the cheese is off. Like, if that makes sense. The cheese is rotten. The cheese doesn't fit in Mousetrap, and I'll explain. The cheese pieces are used like a scorekeeper throughout the entire first lap around the periphery of the board, but you never make additional laps, and once you end up on this loop, every time a mouse is trapped, the mouse who activated the trap collects their cheese. Now one would think, well, that means whoever has the most cheese at the end of the game wins, but realistically there can be only one mouse because the winner is the one who isn't trapped. I want to say that again just because it's fun. There can be only one. Anyway, it's a fight to the last mouse, and so the cheese seems like a secondary afterthought as a scorekeeper or something to keep players extra contentious over as they make their way around the board. But the real goal about making their way around the board is to assemble the trap, and everybody wants to see the trap go off. So it's kind of strange. The original game, you do eventually set off the trap at least 3 times to trap the 3 losing players, but it takes forever to build up to building that trap. So I can see where the pacing of the game is a little frustrating to players, especially with the modern audience. Now, obviously we've been staring at this Rube Goldberg machine, wanting to see it go off, so let's take a minute and set off the 1986 Milton Bradley edition of Mousetrap and see how this trap operates. So we start by turning the crank. It will pull back the stop sign, which strikes the boot that's hanging from the light post. The boot will swing forward and hit the bucket, which contains a metal bearing that goes down the rickety stairs into the rain gutter. It goes down the rain gutter and strikes the helping hand pole, which knocks the marble down the thingamajig into the bathtub, out of the bathtub, onto the seesaw, launches the man into the pan, and drops the cage onto the mouse. Let's see how this goes. Oh no, the man didn't land in the pan, and that must be why the cage didn't make it. As you can see, it's a Rube Goldberg machine and there's lots of loose fitting parts, so sometimes the trap works, sometimes it doesn't. But it's still a lot of fun to watch go off. The board art here from the 1986 edition is very reminiscent of a lot of children's books of that era, so it's kind of comfort food for me, but overall, the gameplay feels a little weird. I'm not sure how I like the fact that most of it is involved with assembling the trap as opposed to letting the trap go off. So let's have a look at the 2021 edition, which fundamentally changes the gameplay on a number of levels and increases your likelihood of letting that trap off. So players work their way around the periphery of the board, however, they continue to make multiple laps in the 2021 edition. In fact, the first mouse to land back on the start space wins 2 pieces of cheese for landing on that space. As players work their way around the board, they have the opportunity to collect cheese, set off the trap, steal cheese, or take shortcuts a la these tubes that go across the board. The trap space is a space that all players will eventually have to traverse as they make their way around the board, thus giving everybody a random chance at being trapped. Now, in the 2021 edition's rule sets, if a mouse is trapped, they're not out of the game. They just have to start over again, and they lose some of their cheese to whichever mouse trapped them. The goal of the game is to assemble a complete wheel of cheese with 6 pieces. So this is a much faster paced, more strategy-based game where mice can steal from each other, and the winning parameters are directly tied to how much cheese is collected. And in my opinion, that makes the cheese finally worth it. I actually think that the 2021 edition is a lot more fun than the 1986 edition as far as the rule set. It's, I don't know, it's up for debate as to which mechanism works better. Now, there were a lot of improvements to the 2021 edition, one of which was actually the deletion of the crank. Now the crank's a relatively loose fitting part on the 1986 edition. What they've done in the 2021 edition is deleted the crank, and now to activate the trap, all you do is pull back and release the stop sign directly. It strikes the boot affixed to the light post, which is the same as the 1986 edition. The boot strikes the bucket, knocks the bearing down the rickety stairs. This time you'll notice the rain gutter goes along the outside of the stairs instead of across the center of the board. Also in this instance, a major change is the steel bearing does not strike the helping hands post that knocks the marble down the thingamajig. In this instance, the steel bearing lands in a second bucket, which activates this broomstick to lift it to a second rain gutter, which drops it into the tub, then onto the seesaw, launching the man into the pan and dropping the cage onto the mouse. So we've eliminated the turn crank, which initially activated the game, and the helping hands pull with the thingamajig and the second marble in favor of this broomstick lever device. I actually think that the addition of the broomstick lever is really ingenious and pretty cool. So let's have a look at how the 2021 edition's trap operates. I love it. Now that we've seen the trap operate, let's have a look at some of the nuts and bolts of the game. So first and foremost, the player pieces. I love the new player pieces for the 2021 edition. They're very cartoony. They have these big, cute mouse ears that are easy to pick up, big, stable bases, easy to move around the board, compared to the 1986 edition, which these are smaller, a little bit smoother. So again, trying to grab them from the top and reach around obstacles on the board to get to them, they're a little bit tougher, whereas these guys, nice and easy to grab, pick up, and move around the board. So Advantage 2021 edition, I really like the player pieces. I also really like what they've done with the cardboard cheese pieces. The cheese pieces now are printed on both sides of the cardboard and have a rounded edge because, of course, they work as your scorekeeper in the game, making your little cheese wheel. So I like that they at least improved the art on the cheese pieces and printed them on both sides. When we compare the die, they're both six-sided die. However, I will say the modern version has a slightly smaller die, which I find confusing. It doesn't affect the gameplay too much, and we're talking like it's a millimeter difference. It's very, very subtle, but it's enough that I found that it was noticeable. So something to take into account. Not my favorite feature of the game, but again, doesn't really affect the gameplay. Finally, we get into the instruction manuals. When we look at the 1986 edition, we have this simple green ink, fold out, relatively complex instructions, but well and clearly printed. So they'll be functional, and again, when it folds up like this into a pamphlet, it's pretty easy to store. When we look at the modern version, we now have a color print with glossy paper. However, this folds out like a Rand McNally roadmap, and that's something that I'm actually not a fan of, because as you get these little corners where there's multiple folds intersecting, eventually as you fold and unfold the instructions, this is going to deteriorate and these instructions are going to fall apart. Now, that being said, that's not a huge detractor, but it is something that I kind of notice when I'm looking at this. Other than that, the art's great. I love the color print. I love when they do put it on sealed glossy paper. That does help keep it cleaner longer, so I do like that. The instructions don't look at all any simpler than the 1986 edition, and that's kind of funny because the 2021 edition actually has fewer parts, mostly in the foundation of the trap and where it connects to the board. But that being said, it's still, boy, the first time you put this together, it seems very daunting. Once you get a feel for it, it's not so bad. But overall, if I'm going to compare these two editions of Mousetrap head to head, I'm going to say gameplay-wise, I prefer the 2021 edition hands down. I don't think that there's a huge enough change in the mechanism between the two to really be a deal breaker for me. I actually think that the mechanism from the 2021 edition was easier to set up in the long run. I didn't like its fit to the board by comparison to the 86. I will say the 86 feels a little bit nicer as far as how it affixes to the board. But that being said, the design of the 2021 edition, the machine is tight and right. I will say, after running both of the traps multiple times, both of them have a lot of margin for error. There are a lot of times where these traps do not go off very well, and I would say that it's pretty even between the two of them. But when you have kind of one of these crazy little Rube Goldberg machines, I think malfunctions like that are to be expected. The biggest reason that I favor the 2021 Hasbro edition of Mousetrap is because the rule set makes the game significantly more fun to play and easier to play. The trap's set up at the outset of the game, so all you have to concentrate on is competing with other players on your way around the board. And getting trapped isn't the end of the game. It's all about getting that whole cheese wheel assembled. So you can get trapped multiple times, you can set off the trap multiple times throughout the game, which that's kind of the draw to this. Everybody loves to see the mousetrap go off. So why not give the people what they want and a rule set that allows for it to go off as many times as possible during the gameplay. So if you're looking to pick up a copy of Mousetrap, I actually would say if you're choosing between a vintage copy and a modern copy, go after the 2021 edition. It's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it.